Creamer Media's Mining Weekly is interviewing Patricia Kula-Verster, the Business Development Manager of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And we're doing this interview on this year's highly successful listing of Copper 360 on the JSE's alternative exchange, the AltX. Hi, Patricia. I'd like to kick off with this question. Why should companies with critical metals and minerals consider listing on the JSE to fulfill their capital raising needs?
So first of all, one cannot ignore the role that critical minerals, of course, have in today's rapid growing clean energy technologies. If you look at the critical minerals such as, copper, magnesium, lithium, nickel, cobalt, rare earths, for example, of course, many, many more, it is really a good opportunity to look into these critical minerals and see where the opportunities lie in terms of the broader electrification of the global economy. As many globally are, of course, looking at securing energy security globally, not only here in South Africa. So really, South Africa has got an abundance of resources and reserves, and it is important to facilitate access to funding and unlocking this potential. So whether you are a new or existing operation, the JSE is really here to facilitate that access to capital, similarly to what we did with Copper 360. Let's also not forget, South Africa's got about 6,000 of unexplored and abandoned mines, some of which are in the Northern Cape, where Copper 360 is. That have got existing infrastructure, which really does create an opportunity to model some data and facilitate and raise some capital for these operations. Access to liquidity and capital give these opportunities a platform to develop these mines and really make a significant contribution to the South African economy that we so desperately need at the moment. And of course, Copper 360 is a great case study that showcases the opportunity that is available for emerging miners in terms of access to capital. So overall, the JSE is really here to facilitate additional liquidity, additional capital raise for all these critical minerals that the global economy is, of course, looking for.
And Copper 360 listed so successfully this year as South Africa's only pure copper play. Had Copper 360 not committed itself to listing, would it, in your view, have been able to raise that level of private placement and debt, which totaled 152 million?
Yeah, well, look, so it's a very interesting question, Martin. And it's a very interesting hypothesis to try and test. I think from my personal perspective, I definitely do think that the JSE played an instrumental role in facilitating that access to capital. I mean, Copper 360 was really a coming together of a number of projects which have given them long life of mine and is, of course, continuously giving them an opportunity to not only raise the initial capital raise, but, of course, ongoing capital raise. The true facts really do reside in the numbers, and Copper 360, through the listing, facilitated a capital raise of 260 million rand. 152 was through the equity, and then there was a debt component there. And straight after listing, they issued at a share price of around 4 rand. It doubled that, and is now trading more or less at the issue price. But it really does show you the appetite in terms of the initial capital raise, the fact that we had some real successful large institutions, high net worth individuals that have shown their support for this listing to actually come in, and of course the ongoing share kind of trading and of course accessibility to the retail market. Let's also not forget, in terms of Copper 360, the use case for copper supply globally has dwindled from around 30 to 10 million tons. And of course, the EV market by 2030 is anticipated to have at least 30% of EV cars driving on the road. Now, each EV car takes around 80 to 85 kilograms of copper alone per car. So if you're talking about the electrification of power, the green infrastructure revolution, globally, there, of course, is a big move to net zero. The use case for copper is very deep and spans across a number of growth areas and growth nodes. So Copper 360 is definitely a case in point that shows the facilitation and the deep capital markets that we have available here in South Africa and access to capital.
And what can be done by companies like Copper 360 to attract more retail investors to buy its shares on the AltX?
So first of all, by listing on any global exchange or any exchange globally, you're essentially using the franchise of that exchange. And particularly in the JSE's case, you're using the franchise of the JSE to profile yourself not only to institutional but retail investors. It is important for issuers to ensure that they maintain their profile, continuously engage with these types of retail investors, and also research coverage. We've got a number of fantastic independent research analysts here in the country that have done a sterling job in terms of covering a lot of these stocks to retail investors. At the exchange, we've got around a dozen retail brokers or so, plus financial services providers that really have made their job to ensure that they make a user-friendly experience, an enjoyable, accessible experience in terms of trading stocks on an exchange. So really, the most important thing is to continuously speak to the retail investor and audience base. The JSE is here to also assist a lot of our companies in terms of their broader exposure. And also, as the company sets to grow and is included in indices, for example, you will then also see a big move and a jump in terms of additional products that these companies can get included into. So exchange-traded funds, for example, which invest in a basket full of shares, is again a fantastic opportunity to get some indirect shareholding in some of these types of companies, as well as actively managed certificates. So overall, I would summarize to say ensuring that you're continuously engaging with the retail investor base and retail stockbrokers through the facilitation of the JSE. We really are here to support our companies in terms of making sure they get a good spirit of institutional and retail investments.
And Copper 360 is outspoken about its ambition to build Africa's next copper giant, and, quote, it says it'll do so slowly from the ground up, unquote. As the 20th biggest stock exchange in the world and the biggest stock exchange in Africa, what can JSE do to enable Copper 360 to achieve its ambition?
So first of all, for us is to be a partner of choice for these companies that have chosen the JSE to facilitate their capital raise on our platform. So really creating an enabling platform to access capital is our first and foremost, I think, responsibility. Making sure that these companies have a continuous profile, not only locally, but also internationally. And also, once companies list on the JSE, and similar to Copper 360, they raise the initial capital, there would be some follow-on capital raise. Once you are listed on the JSE, you get a continuous access to both equity and even debt capital markets, depending on what your funding requirements are. So for us is really to be here as a partner of choice, making sure that we facilitate their capital raises, liquidity, and ensuring that they really do gain their global profile that they're obviously looking at attaining.
And what, in your view, Patricia, should be the main takeaway from this year's highly visible listing of Copper 360, a company which, by the way, describes the JSE as being absolutely fantastic?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So I think the first thing is that from a JSE perspective, there is access to capital via the JSE for junior miners, not only the large miners. And I think that's an important point to make. Again, Copper 360 has been a pure illustration of this, that there is deep and liquid capital markets available here in South Africa, both retail and institutional, so much so that you can even attract some offshore investments. So really, it's an opportunity for existing miners to look to the JSE for their further capital raise, run some models, look at the optimum funding sources, and whether a listing makes sense for you or whether you perhaps want to do a private placement. The JSE can also assist in terms of the JSE private placement platform, which facilitates capital raising for those companies that perhaps are either A, not ready to do a listing just yet, or looking at some form of a pre-IPO funding. So overall, I think as an exchange, our role is here really to facilitate the access to capital for a lot of these junior miners and miners.
That was Creamer Media's Mining Weekly, speaking to Patricia Kula-Verster, the Business Development Manager of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange.